Hey, this is Tony Jones, and I am here on YouTube and in the blogosphere for thehardestquestion.org. I am responding to this week's posts by Russell Rathbun. It is Christ the King Sunday this coming Sunday, and Russell writes in his blog post about the gospel lessons that it is a very problematic feast day. Interestingly, I didn't know this. Russell wrote in his post that it was not invented and added to the liturgical calendar until 1925, between the two great wars, he calls them, and then says sick, like wars are ever great, right? But interestingly, I found that really intriguing that it was added to the liturgical calendar, because we think most of the days that we celebrate during Advent, which here is just around the corner, during Lent, and a lot of the feast days are, of course, of ancient origin. And here we've got Christ the King Sunday, which it's a little bit strange, isn't it, that Christ the King Sunday was invented in 1925, just when there were the few remaining kings in the Western world were being snuffed out. That's the breakup of the Holy Roman Empire and the development of modern Europe was the result of World War I, which had just ended. And here they add Christ the King Sunday. And, not long after that, of course, World War II starts. And I think as a Christian pastor, one of the most intriguing aspects of World War II is the confessing church in Germany, that they wrote what's called the Barmen Declaration, which is very similar to kind of what's behind Christ the King Sunday, and that is that Jesus is Lord of all, that our loyalty to our faith and to Jesus is higher than our loyalty to our home nation. That was the gist of the Barmen Declaration, and it's not dissimilar to the gist of the Christ the King Sunday, which is to say that Christ is king over all, Christ is sovereign and Lord, and so we celebrate it at the very end of the liturgical year before we launch into Lent. But it's a weird thing, isn't it? And I think if I were preaching this Sunday, if somebody asked me to preach this Sunday, what I'll preach on is how weird it is to think about kings and kingdoms in a world where there aren't kings anymore. Just this morning I was flying back from Philadelphia to Minneapolis and got a copy of the Sunday version of the Philadelphia newspaper and read it on the plane. And there was a story in there about Prince William, and that people in the UK are thinking Prince William is about to get engaged because he brought his girlfriend and their family to go shooting with the Queen. They went trap shooting or something, and this was a very big deal in the British media. And the article went on to talk about how William is dating and will likely marry a commoner, which will make a commoner the Queen of the UK. And the British royal watchers all think this is a really good idea, because it's going to bring the monarchy into the modern era, and it's not a bunch of blue bloods anymore. But it raises the question, what is the British monarchy? Why is there a British monarchy? Also in the news this week, there's a woman who was elected king, or not elected, right, but appointed by birthright, king of a little village in Western Africa, because her uncle, who was the king, died, and she's not the queen, she's the king. These anachronisms of king and kingdom are hard to swallow for a lot of modern Christians, and quite honestly, I think they're hard to preach. There's a lot of translation that needs to be done to celebrate Christ the King Sunday. I think a lot of us have a lot of nostalgia for kings and kingdoms and queens, and it probably isn't that odd for us to have that kind of nostalgia on a Sunday so close to Advent, which also brings up lots of nostalgia for many of us. But that doesn't mean that the concept of king isn't theologically troublesome. And I don't know that we need to change the name of this Sunday to something analogous like Christ the President Sunday or Christ the Prime Minister Sunday. Obviously, that doesn't work in the same way. But that doesn't mean that Christ the King Sunday works in the same way anymore either. So, that's my thought. I think the hardest question for this week is, was it a good idea in 1925 to incorporate a Christ the King Sunday into the liturgical calendar called the Revised Common Lectionary? Thanks for watching. Thanks for following thehardestquestion.org.